I'm Daniel Weinberg, and we're here at the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, and I'm sitting in our broadcast studio where we broadcast live streaming all of our author voice shows and broadcasts. I'm glad you're with us today for the one on Nelson Algren, because today's show is with Mary Wisniewski and her biography, Algren, A Life, by the Chicago Review Press. Nelson Algren lived from 1909 till 1981, a Chicago author, essayist, and short story writer. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, he was one of America's best-known literary writers. He was also the lover of French writer Simone de Beauvoir, and he was featured in her novel The Mandarins, which was set in Paris and here in Chicago as well. He may be best known for The Man with the Golden Arm, which became a movie, and also Walk on the Wild Side, which later became an acclaimed Broadway play. Since we're an antiquarian bookshop, we also have historical artifacts which we're able to show for various broadcasts. In this case, we're lucky enough to get an archive from Nelson Algren that was produced and put together by one of his personal friends here in Chicago. It contains 4 signed essays of various pagination, which I'll show you later, approximately 40 pages of typescript written on both sides with numerous handwritten notations and edits, also a newspaper copy of a review written by Algren in the Los Angeles Times, and another article, which I'll show you, related to him, called The Angry Man, by Jan Herman. Now, 2 of the essays that we have are related. They're probably drafts of Algren's scathing review of Simone de Beauvoir's The Coming of Age. Here is a copy of the review that is in this archive. Now, all of these essays contain much material that is in the review. So let me show you the first essay and read a little bit from it, because I think you'll get a sense of who Algren is from my reading some of these essays. So this first essay, though there are no dates, probably is from June 25th, 1972, when the review came about. Let me read a little bit from it. Nor is Madame content merely to present second-hand revelations. She must flatten the reader's nose against her blackboard, prod him with a 12-inch ruler, and give him fair warning that, if he doesn't start shaping up into an adult immediately, she'll hold her breath until he does. Our own society, in her view, considers old age, quote, a shameful secret unseemly to mention, unquote, and that is the very reason she seems, quote, to break the conspiracy of silence, unquote. Since one cannot pick up a paper, switch on the TV, or see a play without being confronted by decrepits from Beckett to Ionesco's Sentience, a panel discussing the economics, morality, sexuality, and psychology of the age, interviews with the dying in which the interviewer appears likeliest to leave first, and a tour of some Sun City, including a talk with a 100-year-old Indian, is perfectly clear that Madame will have to explore her own head to break, quote, the conspiracy of silence, unquote. That is the only place it exists. He goes on, as her life has been a process of deduction, she writes at one remove from reality because at one remove is where she lives. The advantage of living at that address is that there one may sustain an impersonal view. Its disadvantage, particularly for women, is that it leaves her feeling unfulfilled. Well, that gives you a sense of his writing. Now, Algren and Simone de Beauvoir had an affair that's well documented beginning in 1947 when Simone visited Chicago during her first visit to America and called from her hotel room to Algren. The couple traveled extensively internationally together, and by 1950, she had gone back to her longtime lover, Jean-Paul Sartre, and continued writing. Algren is featured in her 1954 book, The Mandarins. The character Louis Brogan is based on him. Algren was outraged by her graphic and open sharing of their sexual experiences, never to speak again after 1964. Algren remained bitter until the very end, though Simone was buried wearing his ring. Now, a second essay that I'm going to read from is also, as all of them are, as I said, signed. It's 19 pages on onion skin paper. And let me read you a bit of this, all with Simone in mind. The absurdity of demanding fidelity in a relationship reducible to a physiochemical reaction has now become clear, unquote. Madam shifted from colonialism to sex without interrupting herself. Quote, therefore, complete fidelity can be experienced only by those who impose it upon themselves at a mutilation. Women who are faithful can only compensate themselves by sublimation or by drink, unquote. Sweeping the floor might help, I suggested, but since Madame never held a broom, the concept remained existential. He went on later. Where had we gone wrong? The original understanding had been that she could make long speeches. This is on their Tunisian trip that he now gets to. The original understanding had been that she would make long speeches if she'd let me find the bars. I'd make the jokes if she'd pick up the tabs. Later he goes on, she had stopped laughing at the jokes, but was still picking up the tabs. I might have attributed this to the fact that she had no sense of humor. On the other hand, the jokes weren't funny. The real difficulty, it struck me, was that her sense of personal responsibility for the world had overwhelmed her response to it. The fate of the Western world, she assumed, hung upon the decisions of Jean-Paul Sartre. But since Sartre himself made no assumption, the full responsibility, not only for that world, but for Sartre as well, had devolved upon herself. For Sartre perceived the world as a clown show, in which his own pratfalls appeared as absurd as those of everyone else. The more profound his judgments, the more lightly he held them. It never crossed Madame's mind that her love affair might not be a matter of global concern. Sartre took for granted the world's indifference to his own love life. Judging by some of the women he slept with, he was indifferent to it as well. There was a sense of humor. Then he went on with more fidelity talk in another essay that's also fairly long, that in a typed notation at the top indicates, quote, now with Candida Donadio, unquote, who was the literary agent for Philip Roth, Joseph Heller, Thomas Pynchon, Mario Puzo, and many others of note. So in part of this trip that he writes about in this essay, they also signed, as you saw, he says that he's trying to find Jews in the area. So he says to his tour guide, but I wish to see the ghetto of Medellin. The tour guide says, but there is nothing in it but Jews. He went to visit his cousins, and I went to visit the Jews. They lived between a sky so white with heat, the eye could not bear it, and hovels so black, each looked like a grave. Between these black hovels they went, in robes just as black, heads downward hurriedly. A girl with a pitcher under her arm turned. When she saw me, she fled for cover. I caught a glimpse of her face as she passed, an oval face, quite fair, the hair and brows and eyes dark, an expression both frightened and intelligent. Here in the very middle of the earth were that savage ancestral tribe living on more primitively than any Jews I'd ever seen, and more forgotten than Pompeii. Here, baking under a volcanic sky, lost and untouched since the Babylonian Exodus, I was back in Ur of the Chaldees. Additionally, in this archive, there are approximately 40 heavily edited sheets of essays, and these contain substantial edits in a variety of handwritings. Certainly some of them are Algren's. And these show Algren's process of writing. Let me show you one. And you can see how much editing really went on. It's interesting to note that Algren often used the back side of letters and other paper for typing paper. One page is from the office of the warden of Cook County Jail and discusses Algren speaking to the inmates in their educational program. On the other side of this one that I'm just showing you now, it's on a flyer for a panel discussion on the abolition of capital punishment, moderated by Chicago icon Studs Terkel and including comedian Dick Gregory. This archive is available for purchase and curation from the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. If you'd like to learn more, please contact us at any time. Thank you for listening.